Good afternoon, welcome to the video, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be working on the cedar sign that we've actually started in the video prior. In the prior video, all we really done was got the lumber planed and dressed, squared and everything from rough sawn lumber from the sawmill. So here we're cutting the boards to roughly the correct length. These boards are going to be the face of the sign. I don't have a drawing for this sign yet. I just have a kind of a working drawing in my head. What we're going to do is eventually glue these boards together, route a 4-line of text sign onto them, build a wooden frame around it. I'm going to take the same boards that we've been working on now and run them through the power sander and get them sanded down, just a pre-sand. So this sander is a 24-inch drum sander. It has two 6-inch diameter drums in it. One of them I've got, I believe it's 150 grit, and the other one I've got 220 grit paper on. So I'm running these through. The planer caused a fair bit of tear out around all these knots. So instead of routing it and then turning around and having to remove quite a bit of face material to get rid of that tear out, I'm going ahead and pre-sanding down to where I get rid of all that tear out. We'll have to do some further sanding down the road, but this is just to get rid of the tear out on it. So this sander is it's pretty aggressive, so it's pretty messy, especially with cedar. Cedar is a really light wood, so it produces really light sanding fines, so they like to float in the air and float all around the room. So this is a pretty messy endeavor. Okay, so now I've got all the boards prepped. I've got a stencil applied to them, and I'm going to use a V-shaped router bit to engrave the boards. So currently I'm using a bit that's V-shaped. It's a 120-degree angle. So I've got it set where I'm cutting about a 3/4 inch wide letter and about 3/8 inch deep. This routing portion of this actually took a pretty good while to accomplish. It took me, I think, about a minute per letter, and there's like 40 letters. And of course I had a bit change in the middle of it or not a bit change, but a depth change to narrow it down for the smaller letters there. It's not bad. Alright, I've changed the bit setup to about 7/16 wide font now, and I'm gonna get these other two lines cut out. I tried putting the camera in several different places trying to get a view of the actual bit doing cutting, and there just was nowhere that I could do it and see what I was doing and get the light in there at the same time. This stencil that I had my wife cut out of vinyl actually worked out pretty well. I set my bit width to just about the same as the vinyl and was able to follow those pretty well. Okay, I've got these sign boards moved out where I can spray paint the routed sections of the boards. That way they'll stand out a bit better. Okay, so now back in the shop, we're going to get started on the frame that's going to go around this sign. It's going to stiffen and strengthen the sign as well as kind of provide an overhang for it to keep some of the elements off of it. The sign's going to basically face north where we're going to have it located, but this will help keep some of the sun off and the elements, the rain and everything from deteriorating the finish that we're going to put on it. So I'm hoping to end up with this little old frame to be somewhere between 3 and 4 inches wide. Could be a little wider, could be a little narrower. So right now I'm just roughing out some cedar boards, trying to get them down close to what we need. For this project, I'm trying to pick as much heartwood as I can. Give this sign the best opportunity to last as long as it can. So I'm just roughing these out, cutting it roughly an inch over what I know we're going to need. We're actually going to glue those signboards together, get a final measurement before we trim these down to the exact size. Now we'll move over to the table saw. Okay. So there's no specifications on this sign that I'm building. It's just something I've got in my head. So what I'm going to do is kind of go through these boards that I have selected and see how wide a frame I can get. See, like there, I can get almost 4 full inches on this board. Run back through the planer and get 4 out of that one, no problems. If I cut from that side, I can eliminate that potentially loose knot. I got a dink in the wood here, probably from sawmilling or storing or something. If I cut it from this side, I could remove that. Let's see, get to that. I'll probably cut a little off of both sides on that one. This one I've got a void in it there. I can still make 4 inches out of that though. That one's a pretty knotty little board there. It got a lot of tear out right here behind all these knots. These knots in this eastern red cedar, if you're not familiar, a sound knot is incredibly hard. The planer blades aren't the sharpest at the moment. They're not bad dull, but they're not the sharpest. So you get this tear out. And of course, part of it depends on which way you're feeding it through the planer. So these knots actually go at this angle through the wood. So if you were to plane this side to where the planer blades were pulling this away, it would try to lay this exiting wood down, whereas it was, because the knot's going this way, the grain beside the knot is running this way, so it's trying to flip it up, kind of like pitting a cat backwards. So this one just needs ripped down to our final dimension. This one as well. So what I'm doing now is I'm starting with the ones that need material taken off of both sides of the boards. And of course, one side of these have been edged and the other is raw for the sawmill. So putting the edge side against the fence, taking the material that I want to get rid of off of one side of these, on the ones that need both sides, and then once I get them all down to just one side, then I'll set the fence to my final dimension. Then I'll run them all through, trimming the one side that still needs trimmed on all 4 boards, and that'll give them all the same width. For those of you that have never worked with eastern red cedar, it is really problematic. It is a very soft wood, and it has very hard knots. It's very prone to split. It's plagued with voids and defects throughout the lumber. It's a continual process from the time you start milling a log on the sawmill plumb to the very last cut you make on the board to build something, of trying to weed out the bad spots. Okay, I got the paint dry. I've removed all of the vinyl. I'm gonna sand the tops of the boards where they were not covered in the sun. They've started oxidizing already. Got a little overspray on them. I got some pencil reference marks, and a little bit of places where the actual router work didn't match up with the vinyl just perfectly. So I'm gonna quick sand the tops of them with an orbital sander. I'm sanding these with 150 grit, and I know in the video it kind of looks like I'm using a hand sander block, is the way I'm moving the sander around, but this is running at 10 times the real speed, so it just kind of looks that way. If I'd have run it at regular speed, this little bit here would have taken 10 times longer, so I would have had to have edited the bulk of it completely out, I suppose. Anyway, it's kind of hard to tell, but if you'll pay attention, you can see around knots I spend a lot more time. That's because of those knots being hard. If you're not real careful when you're sanding cedar, you'll sand the soft cedar away and leave the hard knots. When you put a high gloss finish on it, it really tells, because every knot is a hump in the finish. Also, if you notice, I'm sanding these boards on a piece of foam rubber. You've got to be really careful, especially with small pieces of cedar and an orbital sander, because it'll move the board around on the table, and anything between the table and the board will mar the back of the board. And if you've already sanded it, it will actually do more damage. Alright, I about forgot to turn the camera back on. Working on getting this sign panel glued together. A little mess with my glue. I'm using Type Bond 3 glue for this. Got a little silicone brush around somewhere. Should have took time to dig it out, I suppose. We'll persevere though. Okay, so yes, I am just face gluing these as it appears. I'm not using biscuits or dowels or tongue and groove or anything fancy like that. I really don't think this sign's going to need it. It's going to have boards glued basically across it in 4 places. It's going to have that frame on each end, and then we're going to glue 2 boards where the posts are going to reside, which is about where my last clamp is in the picture at the moment. They're going to be face glued across the back of it, so I really feel like it's going to be pretty solid. So now that I've got everything with glue on it, I've got my sacrificial lumber in there so I don't mar up the edge of the boards. I'm trying to clamp it up and just get all of the boards nice and even with each other. You got to remember, they've already really been sanded, and so the neater we can do the glue up here as far as getting the boards nice and even, the less work we'll have to do down the road. This is about 27 inches across now, so it's too big to fit in anything I've got for a machine to either plane it. My planer's a 20 inch and that sander's a 24. Of course, we could have glued this into 2 pieces and then glued those 2 pieces together, but I believe I can do a good enough job just like it is. I do, however, have this one little place on the corner here that just doesn't want to lay flat with each other, so I'm putting a extra clamp on it to make sure that it ends up where I want it. Okay, while the sign panel is glue's drying, we're going to go back to work on the frame, I'm going to call it. So what we're going to do is create a rabbet, which is an L-shaped notch on the corner of a board. I'm going to use the router and the table here to plow that out so that the boards join and they're structurally sound. So I'm going to be making 2 passes to do that. The way this frame is going to join on the corners of itself, I could get fancy and miter it. It'd actually be easier to miter it. Since this is going to be out in the weather, I don't think it'll hold up the best. So what I think I want to do is just overlap them. I'm going to make the upper and lower, the longer portions, the longest, so the end grain will show on the sides of the sign. So the short ones will be the size of the sign, and the long ones will be longer than the sign by the 2 times the thickness of the sides, if that makes any sense. But where these boards are going to actually join to the flat plate, I would like to have a little bit stronger joint there than just button and gluing. So I've got the router with a straight cut bit. I've got it set the depth of the thickness of the flat plate of the sign itself. Like I said, I'm going to make 2 passes. This bit isn't designed to take very big passes if I try to take it all at once, because I want about 1/4 inch deep. I run a high risk of tear out. So that being said, the ones for the sides will need this rabbet the length of the board. The top and bottom ones, if we made it the length of the boards, then when you're looking at the end of the sign and you're looking at the end grain of those top and bottom boards, you'd see a notch out in the joint between this board and the top board. So we need to stop that rabbet before we exit the end of the board. So what we've not done to the long boards or the short boards is cut them to length yet. So I'm going to go ahead and run these 2 short ones before we trim everything to length, and then we'll have to stop and trim everything to length, because the long ones will have to be to length because we're going to stop short, if that makes any sense. Anyway, here we go. That's a 1/4. Now I've got the fence moved over, effectively making the cut twice as deep on this pass. And what I've actually done is made it as deep as I can go. If you take a good look at that router bit, there's a little piece on top of it there. That's where a guide bearing is supposed to be. So the only straight router bit that I had that doesn't have a guide was only 3/4 inch tall. this is almost 7/8. It's between 13/16 and 7/8 is what the sign face ended up that we're trying to joint here. So that 3/4 inch bit wouldn't have been deep enough. So this is kind of a compromise, having this bit to this height and depth. Okay, I'm working on the frame still. I've got the long ones cut to length, and the length equals the sign plus 2 times whatever this dimension is. And you could figure it out mathematically, but I really don't care what it is. All I need to do is stack them both together, measure them, and add that to the sign. The sign's 52. This is 1 1/8 inches. So this needs to be 1 1/8 inches longer than the sign. Now, in order to keep that corner we were talking about earlier from being exposed, I went ahead and routed this, but this needs to stop where this plane ends right here. That's the end of the sign itself. So on this end you can see there's a radius there. Here's my mark. So what I'm going to do now is just take a wood chisel and starting at my mark, I'm going to plunge straight down. To square this corner up that the router bit made a radius on. Gotta be really careful with this cedar because it is very splitty. A little too aggressive right here in this corner, and I could blow this whole corner off by hand. So I've got just a few flakes picked up there. I'm going to take straight down and cut them off. And this is going to be more for appearance than anything, keeping this corner closed off. If a person made a mistake and plowed all the way through without thinking about it, you could kind of matching piece of grain, cut a little piece and put in there. Now we've got that worked out. Of course I still have to do the other long one. These are cut to length. These are not. These have to be the height of the sign, but the sign's going to go in this groove. So they need to be shorter than the sign by 2 times this rabbet depth, which is approximately 1/4 inch. So basically, these need to be shorter than the sign by whatever this gap is here. And it's shy of 1/4 by about 1/32. So now I'm going to measure the sign and see what it actually came out after it was glued up here, and transfer that measurement to the short boards for the frame and get them finalized to length. So what you should be seeing next after this is bringing the sign back over, taking it out of the clamps, and gluing and clamping it into this frame. However, I'm using a new camera that I wasn't familiar with, and what I did was I started it and it wasn't in record, it was in picture mode, so I took a singular picture for about a 15-minute video. So hopefully everybody can see that. That should be the frame for the sign, give or take a 30-second on the sideboards. So that's how those joints ended up. See, I've actually got them dug out just a little bit over. So now I've already glued the frame to the sign and taken the clamps off, and this is where we're at. So now I've got a 1/4-inch roundover bit with a bearing guide on it, and I'm going to go around the outside of the frame and the inside of the frame, radiusing these corners. So, you know, this lumber has been machined here in the shop, and the corners are all nice, very sharp corners. So this is kind of putting a radius on it, similar to a piece of 2x4 you'd go buy from Lowe's or somewhere. All right, that's got those corners eased over pretty decently. I went ahead and did just a little bit of sanding off camera. It's pretty boring watching somebody sand. I got all these edge boards nice and leveled up and got rid of the glue bumps. So now I'm gonna go around the back edge and round it over with the router. All right, now I'm going to work on this front face, doing some sanding. I need to get the glue on the board joints removed. On harder woods, you could just scrape it. You got to be really ever so gentle trying to do that with a scraper on this Eastern Red Cedar. You'll either pull up parts of the grain or just scar it up well beyond where you'll have to sand it to, even with a good scraper. Okay, if you've made it this far, I sure appreciate you tuning in and sticking with it. I'd like for you to at least hit the like button, subscribe, share it with your friends if you can. If you have any comments, leave them below. The next video will be putting a finish on this, as well as the post that we haven't really seen since the previous video, and we'll be setting the sign in the dirt and looking at the area that this sign represents.